It's the Farmer to Farmer podcast, episode 127. And this is your host, Chris Blanchard. Brendan Grant raises 6 acres of vegetables plus laying hens, Highland cattle, and 100 acres of hay with his wife, Marcelle Paulin, at Sleepy G Farm, just east of Thunder Bay, Ontario, on the north shore of Lake Superior. One of my favorite places. It's so beautiful up there. The only certified organic farm for 500 miles around in Canada. Sleepy G's produce is marketed through a 150-member CSA, grocery stores, a farmer's market, and a small on-farm store. Brendan shares his techniques for bringing new land into production and delves into the ins and outs of tillage and mechanical weed control on raised beds. We also dig into marketing in Thunder Bay, which is an isolated city about 8 hours from any other metropolitan areas with no history of market farming, as well as the impact of their isolation and their extreme climate on production and input choices. We also discuss how the farm survived a serious accident 2 years ago, the impact that accident had on the farm and on Brendan, and how they managed their way through the crisis. We also discuss the pieces that Brendan and Marcelle had in place that helped the farm survive. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is generously supported by CoolBot by Store It Cold. You can build an affordable walk-in cooler powered by a CoolBot and a window air conditioning unit. Save up to 83% on upfront costs and up to 42% on monthly electrical bills compared to conventional cooling systems. And by Vermont Compost Company, founded by organic crop growing professionals committed to meeting the need for high-quality compost and compost-based living soil mixes for certified organic plant production. VermontCompost.com. And by BCS America. BCS two-wheel tractors are versatile, maneuverable in tight spaces, lightweight for less compaction, and easy to maintain and repair on the farm. Gear-driven and built to last for decades of dependable service. BCSAmerica.com. Brendan Grant, welcome to the Farmer to Farmer podcast.
Thanks, Chris. I'm really excited to be here. I kind of feel like a minor league baseball player that just got his major league call-up. So I'm a big fan, and it's a pretty big deal. Like, where do you go to from here?
Wow. Thank you. Okay, so now I'm blushing. So I'm going to throw the ball back to you here and say, let's get started by just having you tell us about Sleepy G Farm, where you guys are located, what you're doing there, and how you're selling what you're doing.
Right. So our farm is just outside of Thunder Bay, Ontario. And Thunder Bay is right at the head of Lake Superior, I think at about 48.3 degrees north. We're 45 minutes north of the Minnesota border, right up on Lake Superior. So Thunder Bay is a city of 110,000, and it's very much a city in the middle of nowhere. From Thunder Bay, it's 8 hours to the next city center. So we are very much an island in the middle of the north.
Right, because going south isn't an option for you guys because you run into the border.
Right, and even there, you're in northern Minnesota, which is kind of the hinterland. And, the next population center down there would be Duluth at, I think, 80,000. And that would be about a 5-hour drive direct south from our farm. So, yeah, Thunder Bay is very much a city in the middle of the bush. And our farm is out on the Sibley Peninsula. And the Sibley Peninsula is this giant landmass that juts into Lake Superior and actually creates Thunder Bay, the body of water. And about 90% of the peninsula is a protected provincial park called Sleeping Giant Provincial Park. And that park is about 70,000 acres. And so we've actually kind of named the farm. We used to refer to the park as Sleepy G, and we're literally on the doorstep of Sleepy G Park. And so, so we farm on a peninsula that is 10 kilometers wide at the base. So that's about 7 miles or so. And so that means that we're 5 kilometers either way, east and west, would put us into Lake Superior.
So do you get a bit of a lake effect out of that?
Yeah. So our springs are later. In a nutshell, our springs are later because Lake Superior is cold. Even in the summer, it's cold. But so relative to the rest of the area, our spring is probably 10 or 14 days later. However, at the other end of the season, we generally benefit from a little bit of a moderating effect that the lake creates. So especially on those August and September days where it's nice and sunny and warm, but then the sun drops below the horizon and things get real frigid real quick, the surface of Lake Superior will radiate the day's heat. And very often we'll mitigate, we won't get our first frost until, into October, when maybe other farms in the area have already had 3 or 4 by that point. So it's a foe in the spring, but a friend in the fall as a general rule.
You're actually not the furthest north farm that we've interviewed, because we talked a few weeks ago to Jason Weston out at Joe's Garden in Bellingham, Washington, which is like 0.2 of a degree north of Thunder Bay. But your climate is a lot more severe up there in general.
It is. If you open the page in your agricultural textbook and you look at the zone classification map, we're basically right where you're supposed to not be able to grow anything. We're zone 2B officially. If you're lucky enough to have a little bit of a microclimate, you might claim to brag to your friends that you're in zone 3A. But we're firmly in 2B. Our local seed saver group, their motto is 2B or not 2B, and because they're always trying to push the limits of what's possible in this area. But that said, we grow pretty well everything. We grow sweet corn and squash and melons. Cucurbits will use the help of black plastic. But most crops are doable. We can't grow sweet potatoes, and we can't and don't really want to grow okra. Or loofah. We tried growing loofah sponge and it just didn't work. So.
I guess food sovereignty is one thing, and loofah sovereignty is another, right?
Totally. It's somewhat inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. So I don't feel particularly disadvantaged, despite the fact that we, officially shouldn't be able to grow much here, but we do. And I should mention that, the Thunder Bay region is dominated by dairy production. So there's a lot of cows being milked in the area around Thunder Bay, and so forage crops do well. They're growing soybeans up here and corn silage and some of those more modern forages, but there's not a lot of vegetable production up here. Thunder Bay just doesn't have a strong history of market farming, and so that's actually been part of the difficulty in accessing equipment for our operation, is that there just isn't that old Alice G sitting in someone's, hedgerow. There just isn't that small scale, cultivator or discs or whatever you might be looking for. So it's been difficult getting equipment for that reason.
So just to go back and make sure that we're touching on the pertinent details of your farm, how many acres of vegetables do you guys have?
Okay, so the farm's 160 acres, or a quarter section.
Okay.
About 90 of that's bush. The rest is our hay and grazing land. We have 8 acres cultivated, and 6 of which would be in vegetables at any given year. We also have a flock of 100 laying hens that we maintain year round, and we raise our replacements for that. We have a small herd of about 25 shorthorn and Highland cattle, and that's growing each year. I harvest about 100 plus acres of hay across 3 different properties around the farm. And we have another 100 acres of grazing land on another farm that we manage down the road. We run a 150 member CSA that runs for 13 weeks, starting in the beginning of July and finishing in the beginning of October. We attend one farmer's market, but we only attend that market from September 1st until Christmas. And we work with 2 small independent grocery stores, and we're the only certified organic farm for 800 kilometers or 500 miles. And we employ 3 full-time staff from the beginning of May until the beginning of November.
So you're the only certified organic farm. Does that include all of the other dairy farms and all of that? You guys are it for your area.
Yeah, unfortunately we are. And it's nice to be able to say you're the only whatever of anything, but it really is not something we're real happy about because, we don't have the organic infrastructure here. We don't have opportunities to collaborate. We don't have access to feed and inputs on, that we could benefit from bulk buying, for instance. And for our herd of cattle, for instance, we buy straw to bed the cows in the winter. And, I would love to have certified organic straw, but it's just not here. It's not even anywhere close to here. I would literally have to drive 10 hours from this farm into Manitoba, the next province over, to access certified organic straw.
So you guys are certified organic for the vegetables, but not for the livestock.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So our layer ration that we feed is not certified organic. So our eggs are, for all intents and purposes, conventional. And our beef, we're trying to move that way. And there's three obstacles to certify the beef. The first being to get us off grain altogether, which we've made steps towards by making silage bales and just kind of weaning ourselves off of malt sprouts, and crushed corn is what we've been using as a supplement for lactating and gestating cows. So that's an easy one to solve. The straw bedding is a bit more difficult one. That would involve us either producing our own grain or switching to a different type of bedding, like sawdust or something of the like. And then the third obstacle would be, because we don't have a certified organic processing facility, we have just one abattoir or slaughterhouse in the region, we would have to get them to slaughter our animals first on each kill day before anything else. And that poses a significant problem because, they're a small facility. They process about 30 head per week. And I know that they always start with hogs. So each day they want to start with the hogs and they finish with steers. So that would be a challenge, And none of these problems are not like you couldn't overcome them, but they are a challenge. There's something that we really would have to put a lot of work towards overcoming.
So I've been to Thunder Bay a couple of times and taught some classes up there. In fact, I think that's where you and I first met was when I came up there probably 4 or 5 years ago now. And
yeah,
there were a lot of people showing up for classes about vegetable farming and even about organic vegetable farming. So it's interesting to me that you guys are the only certified organic farm up there. Is that something that the market is not demanding, or is it just something that there's resistance to among the growers?
It's both. The market, people of Thunder Bay and the farmers market goers are just so enthusiastic to have anything that's growing local that, whether you're certified or you claim to be organic or natural or even conventional, they just want it. It's fresh, it's local, and most importantly, it's produced in Thunder Bay, which, you touched on the idea of food sovereignty. People in Thunder Bay are fiercely proud of Thunder Bay because guess what? Like, we're all we have. We got to take care of each other because we are this, this island city in the bush. So the market's not demanding the certified organic. Some of the other growers use or follow organic practices, and but haven't taken the step to certify. And even for the first few years of our farm and our marketing, we didn't certify. In fact, even in our logo, the slogan is ecologically raised food. And we chose that because we really wanted to stimulate conversation with our customers about what does ecologically raised even mean? And that would be my segue into the way that we grow food organically, quote unquote, organically is it's ecological. That was the founding principle of the organic movement was, ecological stewardship. So, but since that time, we've decided that as leaders in this community, as organic leaders, that we really ought to put our money where our mouths are and certify and, take the extra cost, undertake the extra burden and administrative and record keeping. And we're strong proponents of the organic movement. And, I have to say that Marcelle and I really strengthened our resolve as organic farmers after our first trip down to the Moses Organic Conference. Sitting in a room among, 3,500 other organic farmers and just being overwhelmed with a sense of community and the movement, it really made us come home and say, you know what? I don't care what it costs. I don't care what it takes. We're going to certify because it's the right thing to do. And that's just the right thing for us.
And how much does that cost a year?
I'll put it to you this way. The certifier that flies up from Southern Ontario, which is 1,000 miles away, or 800 kilometers would be the next closest farm, they lose money on us, because they come up. I think it costs about just under $1,000 a year for us to be certified. And in addition to, the other costs of having certified organic seed and that type of thing. But I have to say that, we're better farmers for having done it. Our record keeping was always good, but now it's really good. And I actually like having someone look over my shoulder. I kind of look forward to the organic inspection each summer because it's like, it's a bit of an affirmation that we're on the right track. But I just like having that check and balance and that control. And, it's really easy to think that you're doing a great job at something if there's no one there to tell you otherwise. And so I just felt like me saying that we were organic or ecologically raised food or whatever it was in the past was just me talking. And they were just words. But having that stamp, having that third party, I feel adds a lot of legitimacy to what we do.
Just to kind of turn here a little bit more towards the actual production that you're doing, you said you've got about 8 acres that you're cultivating. Is any of that under plastic? Are you doing hoop houses and high tunnels and all that? Or are you guys growing pretty strictly outdoors?
Mostly outdoors. We have 200 by 24 foot unheated hoop houses and a 50 by 30 double walled propagating greenhouse. So a little bit of cover. We don't use a lot of mulch. I never wanted to get into the routine of putting down black plastic mulch and then tearing it up at the end of the season and having to bring that to the landfill, or use a biodegradable, which, was previously permitted in the organic system in Canada, but now is not, or at least most of those products are not. Because our soil is not biologically active for a long enough period each calendar year that you could be real sure that BioTello or a like product would be gone by the following season. So instead, we, in the beginning, I got the idea to buy a big sheet of black plastic silage tarp, and we plant all of our cucurbits on that. We have 2 blocks of this. We have actually about half acre under these black tarps that we grow our squash, melons, cucumbers, zucchini, that type of thing. And we put drip lines under that. We fold those up and move them around the farm each year. And that silage plastic was a great tool for us to help establish new growing areas as we grew the farm. I would plow in the fall, and then that spring I would cover with this black plastic tarp, which is, 200 feet by 50 feet. And the first year I could get a crop, and it would be a squash crop. And then we would really deliver a devastating blow to a lot of those perennial weeds, as well as the sod that was still breaking down. And the following year, then we could go into a different crop, and that plastic would move on to, pave the way for the expansion of the farm. So currently we have 200 by 50 foot sections of black plastic that we use within our rotation.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that you wouldn't go in for the black plastic. I mean, I see where you come from on the ecological perspective on that, but just dealing with growing in zone 2B, I would think that black plastic would be the first tool that you would look to.
Yeah, not everything we do makes sense, Chris. But it would have been a lot easier to go get a job in town too. So we didn't do that. Actually, we did, but then we quit those jobs. Another product we use a paper mulch product called Weed Guard that comes from a mill in Colorado, I believe. And we've been using that for a lot of years. It comes on rolls of 500 feet. They're 4 feet wide. They are compatible. The paper mulch is compatible with mechanical mulch layers. And we use that paper mulch for a lot of our brassica crops and kale, for instance, which is a full season crop. We use it for our chard. We used to use a lot for head lettuce, but we do use that paper mulch for weed suppression on some of those full season crops. But we've been using a little less of it the last few years because it's what's nice about the paper mulch product is that it will completely and totally break down by the end of the season, sometimes a little too soon, but and it doesn't provide the soil warming that black plastic would, but it does do the soil moisture retention and weed suppression that you're looking for.
You said earlier that you guys weren't using the biodegradable mulches. I guess I'm confused. What's the difference between those two, the two products when you talk about like the BioTello versus just a paper mulch?
The BioTello and the paper are both biodegradable, but the BioTello is going to give you the soil warming, and the paper mulch won't. But for our certifier in Canada here, as of last year, I think BioTello was not permitted because there's an ingredient in there that I think is derived from a GMO. So, we've just not gone down that road. And for right or for wrong, but we haven't gone down the road of mulching all of our beds. What we have done instead is we've just said, well, our climate doesn't really want to grow those crops anyway. So why don't we focus more on the things that we're better suited to, which are root vegetables. And we do grow all of our squash, or winter and summer squash. And most years they're pretty good. Some years they're awesome, but a lot of years they're crappy. And, but our root vegetables are pretty consistent. And, so we've really focused heavily on the root vegetables in those fall storage crops.
And are you guys using raised bed production?
We are. Yeah. And that, I think, was a very intentional decision. We have cool, wet springs. And so raising the soil helps drain out the soil, and it helps warm a bit. And we also don't have really deep topsoil. And so it helps to deepen the root zone. We've got a really nice sandy silt loam that we grow on. But our topsoil is only about 12 inches. And then that topsoil is sitting on another, 10 or 12 inches of pure sand. And then that whole mess is sitting on pure clay. So, not too far down and you're into solid clay. And so by using raised beds, we really do turn that, 11 or 12 inches of topsoil into, 15, 16, maybe 18 inches.
Can you talk a little bit about how you set up and manage those raised beds?
Yeah. So our main production area is organized into 10 equal-sized fields, lettered A to J, or Afghanistan to Jamaica. We use country names. We use, just for fun, and because I'm a bit of a nerd, we use agriculturally significant countries to identify each of our fields. And then K is a double field, and that would, of course, be Kenya. Each of these fields is 400 feet long by 65 feet wide. So they're 0.65 of an acre, or a quarter of a hectare. We have 10-foot roadways, grass roadways between each field, and 40-foot headlands at the ends of the fields for turning tractors around. So each country or field has 12 raised beds. Our raised beds are 48 inches, and then there's an 18-inch wheel track. So we're essentially, 66 inches center to center. The bed tops are 36 inches, and they're planted to either 2, 3, or 5 rows of crop. We have a 4-inch buried water main with hydrants at the head of every other road and for irrigation. And the whole thing is enclosed with 7 strands of high tensile electric slant deer fence, which keeps out the many deer that live on the peninsula.
Yeah, I guess that's the disadvantage of being next to a state park, right? Totally.
But, I put up that fence, I don't know when, a lot of years, when we started growing in that field, I put up that fence right away, and we've never had one single breach of security. And it's, I can't say enough good things about that fence. Very economical to put up as well.
So you said it's a 7-strand slanted electric fence, right?
That's right. So, I got the idea. I'd taken a workshop with Richard Wiswall a bunch of years ago. And I grabbed him at the end of the course and said, okay, look, you think you got deer in Vermont. Like, I'm sitting on the doorstep of 70,000 acres of parkland. Like, we got deer. And because he had recommended using little poly wire with step-ins. And he said he would, enclose 1 acre at a time when the crop was vulnerable. And I just wasn't comfortable with, a temporary or movable type fencing solution. So I took that principle and, I sunk wood posts in on 40-foot centers, and then erected 7 strands of high tensile. So the corners of the fence are rounded because you need to go gradually around those corners. And each of the 7 strands is electrified. The top strand is only 65 inches of height. So clearly not enough to deter a deer from jumping over, but the whole 3D effect of the slant fence is, it's like a 7-foot barrier, and deer can't jump both high and far at the same time. So it works amazingly.
They've also got the eyes on the sides of their heads, which makes it so they don't have good depth perception. And so things like that are really confusing to them as well.
Totally. Also confusing to the many neighbors that were driving by slowly as we were putting up that fence, because it was clearly the strangest fence that had gone up in all past Lakes history.
How do you manage the weeds underneath that slanted fence?
I brush hog on the inside as close as I can, and on the outside as close as I can. And then about twice a season, we'll send someone in there with the weed whacker, and it's like half a day to go and weed whack the fence line. Not a big deal. 1 day of labor for one person once a year, done.
And is that a high tensile fence, or is that just regular electric wire?
No, it's high tensile. And, we also have wolves and bear and, all manner of forest creatures that are roaming the farm, and neighbors' dogs and whatnot. So it doesn't just keep out deer. It does keep out the bear, which would otherwise, find our corn and squash and things like that in the fall.
I didn't even think about that. I mean, of course you guys have bear up there. Do you guys deal with moose too?
No moose. It's all deer right now, but these things are cyclical. The moose will, the deer will die back and the moose population will rise, but it's mostly white-tailed deer.
So just to go back to the beds then, how are you making your raised beds?
I have the Lesh bed former that I purchased off of Market Farm Implement, and I selected that one because it was the most simple bed former that required the least amount of horsepower. And that might be the single best piece of equipment that I ever bought. What that piece of equipment did for us, it forced us to standardize our growing areas and to take a really intentional approach to laying out all of our growing spaces. And, that's kind of the precursor to being able to do really good crop planning and accurate harvest prediction.
What kind of tractor are you using to pull the Lesh bed former?
We have a 2013 Case Farmall 75A that we bought pretty well new. And that's our heavy tractor for our heavy field work. And I used to use my little Ferguson TE20 to do all of my farm work, but we've since upgraded. So I do use the big Case 4-wheel drive tractor to perform the beds. The rear wheels on that tractor are 18 inches, which is exactly what our wheel tracks are. Once the beds are formed, we mechanically cultivate the bed tops with a Tough Built tractor. In 2014, we bought a Tough Built cultivating tractor, which folks may or may not have seen. It's a replica Alice Chalmers G. It has the difference being is that it has a hydrostatic transmission and hydraulic 3-point hitch mid-mount and rear. And ours runs on an 18-horse gas Kohler engine, but they're now making them with electric version and diesel versions.
Why did you go out and buy a Tough Built instead of just searching out a G?
I've just finally reached a threshold with old farm equipment. It's quaint and it's nice and it makes you feel warm and fuzzy inside to resurrect something from someone's, hedgerow. But the reality is that stuff is worn out, generally speaking. And, it's more hassle than it's worth. To get a good quality G today, and get it in running condition and, some new weeding tools on it, you're not going to have any change, I don't think, out of, $3,000-$4,000. And at this point in my career, I'm not really interested in spending $4,000 on an antique piece of equipment when I could spend $10,000 or even $15,000 and have something that's brand new. And, as I said, the hydrostatic transmission is a huge improvement over the G, and it has a little bit more clearance, and it's just, it's just a better, and I took a weed management course at Moses conference with Jeff Moyer a few years ago. And I saw this weird looking tractor in the background of one of his slides. And at the end of the presentation, I went up to him and got him to go back in the presentation and zoom in on that picture. And it was a Saukville, which is no longer in production. And, but it looks an awful lot like that Tough Built that we ended up buying. And, with that, then I went to the internet looking for Saukville, and then I stumbled across Tough Built, and that was that.
And then what kind of cultivating equipment are you using on that Tough Built? Do you have a bunch of fancy weed control equipment, or are you pretty basic?
Yeah. So sweeps and shovels, for now on S tines. And this is where, we've had this tractor for a few years now, and we're starting to learn how to use it. And admittedly, we're not using it to its fullest potential, partly because we just don't know, and partly because we just don't have the tools. The next step for us is to get basket weeders for those, newly emerged seedlings that, in wet soil and cool spring, where we just need to, when things are growing slowly and we just need to get in right close without throwing too much soil. And, I hear a lot of your guests talk about finger weeders and how life-changing they are. And that's definitely on my radar. So, if we were to have this conversation a year or two from now, I'd hopefully tell you that I've got a real solid arsenal of tools for that tough build. But for now, sweeps and shovels, it's doing a pretty good job, but I know there's a lot of room for improvement. One thing I did do, I built a 8-torch flame weeder for the rear of that tractor. So I bought just the manifolds, the flame weeding manifolds from the guy who sells them on flameweeder.com or whatever. And I built a 3-point hitch mounted flame weeder for that tough build tractor. And so we do pre-emergence flame weeding on our carrot and beet crops, especially with a tough build, and being able to creep along at, 60 feet per minute or whatever speed I want to go, and just roast all those weeds is pretty satisfying. Yeah. And that's really the biggest advantage of the tough build, I think, over LSGs or the Super A farmals or any of those. Those were gear transmissions. And, I think that even in, low gear at low throttle, sometimes it's going faster than you want. The hydrostatic transmission is, I'm not a big fan of hydrostatic transmissions for most tractor applications, but for cultivating, it's pretty hard to beat. I have a lot of good things to say about it.
In a short season like you guys have, I'm sure that transplants are a really important part of your production. How are you guys doing your transplant production?
Yeah, transplants are huge, and we continue to propagate, all the way through the month of July. Marcelle, that's one of her big responsibilities on the farm. She's the chief propagator, and she does a great job of producing really nice transplants in a soil block system. We transplant out by hand. We don't have a mechanical transplanter. I've looked at it so many times that I'm done looking. Until we either specialize in one crop or another, or one spacing, in a big way, then there's not really a transplanter out there that will fit our needs really well. And, it's really not a big deal to slam in, 1,200 heads of lettuce on a 400-foot bed. It really isn't. I mark all those beds. I dibble them with the tough built. We had a custom-made row marker with dibbles on it. So before any transplanting or direct seeding occurs, we'll run across the bed with the tough built and mark out the rows and dibble the holes. And then we just go off of that. It's not the most efficient, but it's pretty efficient for the investment and the time spent in that operation.
Okay. So one of the things that I've seen with raised beds and weed control is, especially on farms where things are being done, without a guidance system for the edge of those beds, which it sounds like you're kind of freehanding it with your row marker, is, if that row marker isn't just dead centered on the bed, then when you come along to cultivate, you might be trying to stay centered on your rows as you're cultivating. But if they wander a little bit to one side or the other, it's easy to have places where either you're cutting way deep into the edge of the bed or the shoulders of the bed, or where your cultivators actually get entirely off of the bed. And it's one of the things that I hate about raised beds. How are you guys dealing with that?
That's something that was an unexpected problem when we started using the tough build. It's like, this isn't really getting the shoulders very well. And so, yeah, it's something that is a bit of an issue. First thing is that our beds are really straight. Our beds, I'm the guy with a tape measure and all the toolboxes on all the tractors, and I'm splitting hairs out there when I'm doing my field work. We don't have GPS guided tractors, but we do employ SPS, which is a much more low tech system. It's a spatial positioning system, as I like to call it. And it consists of a a wheel marker and those little fluorescent flags that you plug into the field, and you can get into it for about $110. And that's how I do my field work when I'm either casting or gathering that first furrow. I'm always using those little flags and my wheel marker, and I get things just perfect. And then as I form my beds, I mean, they're good. They're real good. Now, they're not perfect because nothing is. And so then the tough built, when it comes in on its first try, the first time over the bed, we've got the tough built wheels set so that the inside width of both the front and rear wheels on that tractor they're actually squishing the shoulders of my raised bed by about an inch on either side. So, that said, when we're straddling that row for our cultivation operation, it's basically like you're on a track. And if the bed bends or veers a little bit, the tractor it follows it. It's actually kind of like locked in there pretty well.
Nice.
Now, the shoulders are still a bit of an issue. Right now, we found the best thing is the rear sweeps behind the wheels, behind the rear wheels. If you go at a good enough speed, you can kind of throw soil from the wheel track up onto the side of the shoulder. But this is where I think that I could really benefit from exploring, a custom setup of finger weeders or something of the like on the rear to get those shoulders.
Tell me about your soil block setup. I mean, 6 acres of vegetables on soil blocks, that's a lot of blocks.
Yeah, it is. We use a mini block we use 1020s. So the blocks are in 1020s. And if we're trying to, germinate en masse, we'll use the little mini blocks. And then a lot of times we'll just transplant mini blocks straight into the field. For lettuces would be a great example. We do use 288s for our onion and leeks. And that's, I think, the only thing that we do kind of in a more conventional way. And then the rest of our soil blocks for our brassicas and most everything else would be not the 2-inch blocks, but I think they're 1 5/8.
And are you doing those by hand then with just a floor blocker, or do you guys have a machine that's kicking them out?
We do them by hand. We bought the stand-up model one, and then I ended up, at Marcelle's request, cutting the handle in half and re-welding it and shortening it up so it can be used at table height. Because the problem, as you know, with soil blocks is that they're really heavy. And so it's nice to be able to stand to block it out, but then you got to bend over and pick up that tray. And yeah.
Okay, that's brilliant. Props to Marcelle on that one. I wish somebody told me that idea in 2001.
Hey, I just do what I'm told.
Okay. And then are you guys making your own mix, or are you guys buying that in?
Yeah. So after listening to your podcast, I sure would love to bring some Vermont Compost Company blocking mix into the farm. But so we use OMRI listed medium that we then fortify with our own fertilizer. And then we went through the stage of making our own, compost, garden soil, the L.A. Coleman recipe that we tweaked, but we've since just kind of gone with a good mix that we then fortify. And
then, because I know that you like your machinery, are you using any harvest aids then?
The only thing we mechanically harvest is the potatoes. I have a nice 1-row McCormick Deering potato planter that helps in the beginning of the season, and then I've got like an international, like a 1970s era single row digger. And then for the rest of the harvest, we've got a keyline plow that we use for subsoiling on the farm, as well as pasture rehabilitation and refeeding. And I will use that keyline plow as a kind of a bed lifter for parsnips and storage carrots and things like that.
So loosen them up and then pull them out by hand.
That's right. And, as I said, we've got a nice sandy loam soil. So if the soil moisture is correct, a lot of times you can just pull those carrots, and they're nice, big, long, straight carrots, and you don't even need to fork them at all. But if the soil is if the conditions aren't quite right, then you go through in the fall with a keyline plow and lift everything, and we can just go along and just pull carrots and pull carrots and pull carrots, pull carrots until almost Christmas.
Really, you guys are actually in the field until almost Christmas.
Sorry, we'll be selling them till Christmas. The last 2 seasons, we've been actually harvesting carrots up until the middle of November. And, they are good and sweet by that point, boy. And, and the last couple of years, Marcelle and I our staff finished the beginning of November, and we're out there slogging it out. And there's still, you look out in the field, it's like, oh, there's still money there. And, last year we just called it. We're like, you know what, we're done. There's a bed of carrots that we just didn't get to and whatever. But that was the middle of November. And then we will continue to market those carrots and parsnips and whatnot, into the new year, at the farmer's market until Christmas. And then we'll just maintain our wholesale accounts as deep into the new year as we can.
What are you using for storage on those? Do you guys have a walk-in cooler?
Yeah. So in 2012, I built a 30 by 60 foot story and a half pack house, which is kind of like a multi-function building. The majority of it is our pack house with a 150 square foot cooler. It also has a garage on the back end for parking a tractor. It's got a bunkhouse upstairs for staff for living quarters, as well as a staff kitchen and kind of meeting room. And then on the very front of it, facing the farm entrance, is a little self-serve farm store that we have a double door glass cooler and small deep freeze that we stock year round with eggs and meat and whatever vegetables we have. So it was a great building. It was a big project for me to build from scratch. It was my first, real big building project. And it was probably the best investment to date on the farm.
When I'm looking at where you guys are located, you talk about having a little farm store. Is that a significant part of your business?
At this time of year, it is not significant, but it's steady. And, for instance, like yesterday, we brought in $160 in the farm store, and that's just like, we didn't do anything. There's just people stopping by, and that adds up over the month of, July and August, because of our proximity to Sleeping Giant Provincial Park. And there's lots of cottages in kind of in the township. There's a lot of seasonal residents. So most of that farm traffic this time of year is seasonal people. But then we have our regulars throughout the whole rest of the year who come every week for their eggs and their meat and whatever. But, at a time of year when we're not actually marketing and we're not at a farmer's market and the CSA hasn't started, it's an easy sale. Like for instance, right now we're selling carrots in our farm store today that are last year's carrots that we found in our root cellar that are still good, and we bagged them up.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
You said you guys have a root cellar. Is the root cellar part of your commercial operation, or is that more of a home-based thing and you found some extra carrots in it?
Yeah, the latter, but it's quickly shifting to the former. So, we've just kind of finished construction on a new house on the farm. We've been living in an old kind of cabin, you might say, for a lot of years since we bought the farm in 2006. And anyway, we've put up a new house, and we are just about to move in the next month or so. And what we're going to do with the old house is we're going to convert the whole basement, which is just a block foundation, into a proper root storage facility. And that will enable us to pursue what we think that we really want to do, which is strengthen our CSA by going longer and deeper into the year and kind of doing that kind of winter CSA model. And as for the house, the old house that we're currently living in, that might become living quarters for staff. It might become some sort of barn. We're not sure. I mean, it's a real small house anyway, so there's not a lot to be saved. And
then on the subject of your CSA, you said you guys have a 150 member CSA based, I assume, in Thunder Bay, right?
That's right.
Well, yeah, I guess are you guys packing boxes for that CSA, or are you doing something else as far as the distribution?
No. So we got 150 members. We do one box size. 90% of our members pick up in town. We do a farmer's market distribution style at one drop site on Wednesdays from 4 to 6:30 p.m. So yeah, you got 135 people coming through there in a 2.5 hour window. It's pretty busy. And then the other 15 members, or 10% roughly, pick up at the farm. We use Member Assembler to manage the CSA logistics, something we've used for the last few years. And, it's a bit pricey, but at the same time, we feel it's still worthwhile for us. And because some members do decide to change the pickup location if they're 1 week they're out at their camp or whatever, and they want to pick up at the farm, that's easy for them to do. And then we produce a newsletter that we call Well Vittles, or Well Fed. And our newsletter is something we take a lot of pride in, and it's intended to kind of create a window into our lives as farmers, as well as the bigger picture of agriculture for our members. And each issue of Well Vittles features roughly 1,000-word essay or article that talks about food or farming from a personal or political or sometimes philosophical point of view. It's a real highlight for our CSA members. In fact, I think a lot of our members like the newsletter more than they like the food.
Yeah, I remember finding that too with some of our members. But it's a lot of work to put together a good newsletter, especially in the middle of the season.
Yeah, it is. It takes about 4 or 5 hours of work to publish it, each week. And that's one of the, that's kind of fallen onto my lap for the most part. And, I enjoy doing it. But, to me, it's a real investment in the community that is our CSA membership. Like, those are our people, and they really need to understand what our lives as farmers are like to the greatest extent they're able, because in understanding our lives and understanding the vagaries and challenges and realities of food production, they're going to be that much more committed to us as people and us as a farm business. And I think that's where our security in the future lies, is within our CSA membership, not farmers markets, not, wholesale accounts, not, fickle chefs, but with our, down to earth, regular, everyday people that are our community.
Awesome. Brendan, we're going to stop there, take a break, get a word from a couple of sponsors, and then we'll be right back with Brendan Grant from Sleepy G Farm, just east of Thunder Bay, Ontario, on the North Shore of Lake Superior. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is brought to you by Store It Cold's CoolBot. Way back in 2000, the year I started Rock Spring Farm, the manager of the local food co-op complained that the lettuce from local producers lasted for days in her cooler, while the lettuce from California lasted for weeks. So what was all that about 2,000 miles fresher? I later found out that none of the local growers had a walk-in cooler. 17 years later, this is still the number one complaint I hear from produce buyers. You have to get your produce cold. The difference between now and then is there's CoolBot. You can build an affordable walk-in cooler powered by a CoolBot and a window air conditioning unit, saving up to 83% in upfront costs and up to 42% on monthly electrical bills compared to conventional cooling units. Use the code FTF at checkout to double your CoolBot warranty at no charge. StoreItCold.com. Perennial support for the Farmer to Farmer podcast is provided by Vermont Compost Company. When you talk to Carl Hammer, the company founder, he'll remind you that potting soil is a set of promises about a product that has to do a really hard job, produce a healthy plant in a restricted media volume. When I started farming, I focused on the cheapest ingredients I could get so that I could make my own potting soil. But as my farm grew and as I saw the challenges we were having getting great plants out of the greenhouse, I gave it a second look. And I came to what in retrospect seems like a fairly obvious conclusion, that success in the greenhouse depends on the success of the plants that are growing there, and that just like the rest of farming, that success rests on the stuff that the plant is growing in. The cost of your potting soil isn't insignificant, but it's a small cost relative to the plant material, the heat, and the labor that you're going to put into producing your transplants. And if the media fails, the rest of that enterprise is a sunk cost. So get media that works year after year after year and grow some great transplants. VermontCompost.com. And we're back with Brendan Grant from Sleepy G Farm, just east of Thunder Bay, Ontario, on the North Shore of Lake Superior. Thunder Bay, Ontario. I don't know. I've been there a couple of times, and I'm really attracted to that area. And it's not a big town, and I'm kind of curious how the marketing has gone there, because it's also not a. It's clear there's some cool things going on there, but it's also clear that it's not an upper class community. It's not like Rochester, Minnesota, where you have a city full of doctors. It's a pretty working class town.
That's true. But, one thing that doctors and mill workers all have in common is that, they eat every day, hopefully 3 times a day. And because of that, everyone is interested in food. Everyone wants good quality food. And, food's not a big part of everyone's life, but There's enough people year after year, I think, that are moving towards that. I look at our CSA membership, and some of the people in there, you're surprised when they sign back up the next year, because they're not foodies, and that a lot of times they don't even really know how to cook, because they're asking questions like, well, what's this? Well, that's a yellow zucchini. How do you cook it? Just like a green zucchini, but they like the CSA. They like the freshness of food. And I don't think that's a fad. I think that's just the trend. And, our focus on our farm is our CSA, more so than just growing for the general public. And I think that's where we're continuing to go in the future. And people aren't going to stop eating. And if you can give them food that is well priced and is, good flavored and comes with a face and a story, if it's not that much more than the grocery store, if it's the same price, why wouldn't you? I think that's true of all towns and small cities in North America or anywhere. People are going to eat. And if you're not overtly letting them down, then they're kind of your customer to lose.
And do you find that you actually have some advantages because of the isolation of Thunder Bay? When I lived in Maine, we were at the very end of the produce distribution chain. Stuff had to go, if it was coming from California or Arizona or Southern Ontario, it was going through a big city, and then it was going to Portland, Maine, and then it was coming to us. And by the time it got to us, it was pretty tired, and it made it having, we had fresh food, and that made for a pretty easy marketing pitch.
Right. And, Thunder Bay, so a couple of things we got going for us. One is what I mentioned earlier, is this kind of fierce pride of the region, because we are kind of on this island in the bush together. But, food travels a really long way to Thunder Bay, in the same kind of example you just gave. And because of that, the cost of food at our grocery stores is higher in Thunder Bay than, say, other areas of Ontario, in Southern Ontario, where bigger population and bigger city centers. And so that said, if the price of, green beans, for instance, at the grocery store is $3 a pound, and, the farmer is bringing peas or beans to the farmer's market at $3 or even $4 a pound, if it's about the same price, you're going to get that sale based solely on the fact that, those beans don't look like they're in a bar fight last night, which they do when they're in the grocery store and they've come that long way. So, we're definitely have the advantage of already people in our community are used to paying a higher price for their food. So us as small scale producers, which, we're able to compete a little bit better. 10 years ago when we started with the farm, there was a big gap between, the grocery store food and then what we were producing. And today, honestly, Chris, a lot of our stuff is, marginally more expensive. We're talking 10% more, or sometimes even less. So, that's an advantage to us.
Now, you said, just talking about prices, just to shift into economics a little bit, you said that you and Marcelle both used to work off the farm, and now you're both full-time on the farm?
Yeah, that's right. We both used to work for the provincial government. I worked at a tourism site in Thunder Bay. I ran the farm at a fur trade post, an old recreated fur trade post. And I worked that job for almost 5 years. And that was, a regular person's job with pension and benefits and all those types of things. And at the same time, Marcelle worked at Sleeping Giant Park, which is part of the Ontario Park system. And, she worked seasonally, as did I. I worked 10 months a year and she had a 6-month-a-year contract. And, those are good jobs. Those are jobs that we could potentially retire in. But, for me, at least I didn't have to take a step away from farming to build my farm dream. I was still farming kind of in the year 1815 at a historic fur trade post. But at the same time, my learning curve was still rising, as it always is. And I was engaged in my work. But we got to the point where it was just too hectic, both working off the farm. I was driving 2 hours a day to go to that job. And, we in fact ran our CSA for the first 2 seasons while both working off the farm. And because we both worked in tourism, our weekends were Wednesday and Thursday. And it just so happened that there's a Wednesday farmers market in Thunder Bay. So that became our CSA day. And we would drop off our CSA boxes and market at the same time. And then Thursday was our day off, also known as our day to do everything like weeding and making hay and everything else. So it got too hectic. So I quit my job first. And then a couple of years later, Marcelle quit her job. And it's been a few years since she's been at her job. And yeah.
And you guys are making a living on the farm?
Yeah, we are. Yeah, we're making it happen. I think that I always feel like things are tenuous, that, it could all come apart at any time. But, one of your guests recently said something about, if your planning is working and it's proven to work, then take the leap and just trust that it's going to keep on working. And I think there's some wisdom to those sentiments. Okay,
so speaking of feeling like things are going to fall apart at any time, I happen to know that you had a pretty serious accident 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, it was just 2 years ago, a few days ago. And it was July 5th, and July 5th, 2015. And I took a fall from the top of our cow barn, which is a 35-foot tall building. And I fell and broke both my heels and didn't walk for 4 months. And then when I did start walking, it was, with walking casts, and it was a lot of months before I was, moving and getting stuff done. And yeah, that was a really difficult season for us. And it continues to be a bit difficult in that I'm still recovering, and, I still have pain, and I'm not, I got a bit of a limp, and, days are tough on my feet for me. Things are continuing to improve, but that was a pretty scary time for us.
So I know that you and Marcelle have been involved in the volunteer fire department there. I assumed you guys have a pretty strong safety focus on your farm. Can you talk a little bit about what happened?
Yeah, totally. That's been part of my coming to terms with my accident has been, how did I let that happen? This is a good lesson, I think, for all of us farmers who tend to go 100 miles an hour for a good portion of the year. The day of my accident, it was a Sunday evening, and I had come into the house at around 6 p.m. And I said to Marcelle, I am absolutely exhausted. I am mentally and physically exhausted. We have been going 100 miles an hour since April, and I need a break. And she concurred that, we had been run ragged. And we together, we said, you know what, let's take next Sunday off. But for now, tonight, I need to go back up onto the barn roof to finish the job I had started early in the week, which was replacing the ridge cap on, the steel ridge cap on the cow barn. And so I took a quick power nap. I set the alarm on my phone for 20 minutes, and I fell asleep, sitting up, like full dreaming sleep in that 20-minute span. And the timer went off. And I popped out of that chair, and I walked out the house, and I walked to the pack house, and I grabbed a handful of gummy bears or whatever was in there, and I started stumbling across the yard, putting on my climbing harness, and I put on my harness, and I got up onto the barn roof, and I clipped in, and 45 minutes later, there's a helicopter landing behind my barn, and it was, another 5 months before I could walk properly. So, what had happened, I unclipped my rope to, grab something, and, I was groggy, and I was overtired, and my head wasn't in the game, and I was doing something I shouldn't have been doing with that level of risk at that time. And it was, a function of, what we always do. We all fall into our routines of our old habits, which is go, 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 and, yeah, so it was a tough lesson. The silver lining is that I didn't break my brain or my back, or, I didn't get dead, which could have very easily happened. And instead, I got off real easy, and that, I will recover, maybe not 100%, but I will recover, and I can continue to farm. So, yeah, lesson learned there. I think lots of lessons, and there's, of course, lots of personal growth that came from laying in bed for the rest of that year, that season, and watching everyone around me work their butts off to compensate for my my lack of ability to work alongside them. But, I think that sometimes you got to know when to say enough is enough, and to not, to know when to take a break, and to recognize that, when you get tired, either mentally or physically, then that's when bad things are likely to happen.
So how did you guys deal with this as a farm? I mean, you're a major part of the labor force on the farm, and you are it's been obvious from the times that I've talked to you in person and the conversations that we've had on the phone previously, you're a hard worker, and you really identify strongly with your ability to do that physical work. How did you handle that personally, and how did you guys handle that as a farm?
Yeah, well, the accident happened 3 days before the first CSA delivery. And, of course I spent a number of days in the hospital. And in fact, I wrote the first CSA newsletter from my hospital bed, perfectly cheerful, like nothing had happened. Cause you don't want to break the news to your membership that, a key player just went down, after they anteed up and for the CSA season. And so, and Marcelle, she executed that first CSA delivery perfectly with the help of the great staff we had that year. And, I think the real thing that we had done that helped us through was that we had good equipment that worked. We had a couple of brand new tractors, that, even an experienced person might stumble with them a bit, but I know that the tractor's not going to fail. Like, it's going to work. We had been, farming long enough at that point that we had really clear systems and processes for everything that we do on the farm, from bunching kale to, watering the greenhouse. And so, we had those processes in place, and we were able to, because of that, we were able to take on a lot of volunteers, random community members and friends. You can imagine the type of people that come out of the woodwork in those times. And we were able to take those people on and put them to good use, which we normally don't take on a lot of volunteers because, as a lot of your listeners know, it's a lot of work to manage someone who doesn't really know what they're doing. I thought that before the accident, I thought that I was like indispensable. Like, I was the most important person on the farm, and that, if the captain, if the ship kind of was asleep at the wheel, that the ship would go down. And, that didn't happen. And, it was really humbling to see that it didn't happen, but it was also really relieving to realize, that it didn't happen. And it really took a little bit of a load off me. I thought, okay, well, not only is Marcelle more than capable of running this farm, but, we as a couple, we as a business are able to withstand something as drastic and tragic as this.
And did you guys make changes in how your operation worked as a result of your accident? Have you adjusted your schedule or?
Well, I that season I did all the administration and emailing and newsletter and all the stuff that I could do from my bed with 2 casts on my legs. After 50 days from the accident, that was my return to work date. And, that looks like me crawling around in the fields with two fiberglass casts on and crawling through the fields, harvesting where I could. I had one of those electric scooters that you often see people around town zipping around in. And I could get around the farm on my electric scooter, and then I could lower myself down to the ground because I was non-weight bearing on both feet. So it was really difficult you couldn't limp or use crutches or anything like that. So I would literally crawl everywhere. And, I'd work in the pack house from my scooter, and I could wash stuff, but then someone would have to put it in the walk-in cooler. And, I was only working at about a third or a quarter of my regular Brendan type capacity, but, it made me feel good. It kept me engaged, and, I was pitching in just like everyone else. It was tough. It was tough. And, last season we started our season on a different footing, better footing. We made 0 changes to our crop plan from 2015 to 2016. It was kind of like a retake. Let's try this again, this time with, all hands on deck. And, but, last spring I had, I was still recovering, and I had to go 100 miles an hour to try and catch up on, all of my equipment that had gotten broken in that year that I wasn't able to run it or maintain it. And, last year was a real struggle for me. Also physically, could be on my feet until about 1 o'clock each day before my feet really started to hurt. But things are a lot better this year, and I think that next year it'll be even better. But I did struggle, especially last year. Like after the accident, I kind of lost my mojo. Like I was just, I just couldn't get engaged in the farm the way I used to be. And part of that was not really knowing my place anymore. Like I kind of felt a little bit irrelevant, or I just didn't know where I fit in. And so that was tricky. And for the first time in my life, I experienced a little bit of depression. It's like, I'm feeling sad and grief, and I'm feeling worried for the future. And last season was tough for me. And but things, as I said, things are a lot better now. And as a result of my injury, the jobs that Marcelle and I do on the farm are now a lot better defined. And I think that we're on a better path as managers. So, as an example, like as you mentioned, Marcelle and I are both on the fire department in Pass Lake. And at a fire, everything that happens on one of three levels: the task level, the tactical level, or the strategic level. And so, the fire chief is the one who's working on the strategic level, figuring out, what's going to happen, what we're going to do. The officers, the captains, are working on the tactical level, figuring out how we're going to do that. And then the firefighters are the ones who are actually doing the actual task. And so now on the farm, like I find myself, I work mostly in the tactical level. I am doing the field work and the bed prep and setting up and making sure the crew's got the tools to do the job. And then I move on ahead of them and leave them behind to accomplish that. And, I'm kind of the one step ahead type guy. Whereas Marcelle, she's working more on the strategic level, the bigger picture. And because we have a high turnover of staff every year, she's also working on the task level as kind of the field supervisor and crew leader. But, our jobs are a bit better defined now. And I think that's actually a good thing.
Has your injury and not being able to operate at 100% physically forced you to change how you do that tactical level of work?
Yeah. If I'm pushing myself real hard and I'm on my feet on uneven ground, for a long day, then I'm happy to get on the tractor the next day and, take a little bit of a load off. But I think more than anything, I just don't push as hard as I used to, because you know what, like, it's not worth it. Like we all believe strong in what we're doing, and, we're really passionate about it, but it's not worth dying for. And, sometimes it's okay to just say, you know what, I'm going to take the night off, or I'm going to take the weekend off, or, you know what, one more rainstorm on this old barn without the ridge cap protecting its roof isn't going to be the demise of this old barn, So I think that I'm learning to have a little bit better perspective on life. Now, I have to say, to qualify that, though, that it's because Marcelle and I have always kind of pushed the limits of what's humanly possible. That's kind of that work ethic, I really think, got us the equipment and the infrastructure and the processes in place on the farm that kept us afloat when I went down. So I think that if I took a more cavalier approach from the beginning to my work, then we would have been in a lot worse shape when I did go down. But because we were so hardcore for so long, it kind of put us in a position where, okay, the farm can float, the farm can take care of itself here.
I think it's one of the things that's really important to recognize, I think, is, in the different seasons of the farm, right? In the beginning of a farm, so much of what you're doing is sweat equity, and you can't pay for labor with sweat equity. You can't pay for tractors with sweat equity. You got to put that in to start to get the momentum to be able to get the tractors and get the workers, and then kind of how you shift from that, but also, how you stay safe in that time when it is sweat equity, and that every extra hour is really an hour of investment in your farm. And it does make a big difference down the road, kind of to the point where you guys get you to the point where you are now, where you can, you really do have the ability to step back from that a little bit.
Absolutely. There were lots and lots of days and years where, we'd come home from work, from our off-farm jobs, we'd put on a clean or dirty shirt rather, take off the clean one, head out to the field, and, we'd come in, 6 hours later. We put in pretty well full day's work with headlamps on, weeding with headlamps. That was common. That's what we did. That's how we made it happen. That's how we ran the CSA while we both worked off farm for the first couple of years. And, I don't regret it. I definitely don't regret it. It's character building, and and I think it was necessary, but I also wouldn't do it again now. But, I'm older now, and, and I'm not as, I'm getting tired, man.
It happens.
I still got lots in me, but I've still got lots in me, but, I got a little less in me.
So do you and Marcelle have kids?
We don't, we've been really focused on building the farm and having calves and other things, but no kids so far.
Which actually, I'm going to make a funny transition from kids to calves, but, both being additional enterprises on the farm, really, how do you guys integrate the management of livestock with the management of the vegetables? We actually just heard from Ray Tyler down at Rose Creek Farms saying, he hasn't seen very many good examples of people doing a successful job of managing vegetables and a successful job of managing livestock on the same farm. How are you guys pulling that off?
Yeah, it's really difficult. And there's a really good reason why you don't see a lot of market farms also have livestock in a big way. And certainly a lot of times they're, bringing in feed rather than making their own. There's good reason for that. It's really challenging. So for one thing, I breed all of our cows with artificial insemination. And so I breed in, the winter months. So starting in February, March, April is kind of my breeding season, which means that we then calve, November, December, January-ish, So basically once the CSA wraps up, then we start calving. And because we bought an old dairy farm, we've got a nice little tie stall cow barn that we tie stall our cows in the winter months in the barn. They're in at night and then they're outside during the day. And it's great because we get to spend time with the animals that we love. But most importantly, we're able to capture all that poop, which then goes to the barn cleaner, out to the compost pile. And, then I compost it quite vigorously and, over 24 months before it gets to the vegetable field, and with that system, we're able to generate about 30 ton of well-aged, 24-month-old compost through that system. And, because of our geography being in the middle of nowhere and having no other infrastructure, organic infrastructure, I feel like that's our best, that fertility input. I mean, that seems like the only way to go for us. And, I often joke that we're vegetable farmers in the summer and we're poop farmers in the winter. And, so it's a bit of a juggling act. Making hay is a big deal. We've got a lot of money and equipment tied up in equipment for doing that. And, starting in another week or so, I'll be kind of on the hay train for the next foreseeable several weeks to try and put away enough feed to feed those cows for the winter. Yeah, it's a challenge, Chris. We do it because we believe in it. It seems for us to be the only way that we can feed our soil in the way we think we ought to. I mean, we do buy in some other input, like alfalfa pellets is one we've been using a lot lately. But as an example, we bought alfalfa pellets this year, certified organic pellets, and they were $400 a ton. But the shipping on each ton was like $330, so
right.
Fertility is a big deal. I don't see us being able to economically import it. And unfortunately, our farm isn't big enough that I could put 50% of my land in, plow down or green manure each year and rotate back and forth. I would love to do that. I can't. I can put in about a third into green manure, and then another third of the fields will get that nice compost, and then the other third will either get those alfalfa pellets or something similar, or you'll get nothing, and that'll be the residual. We'll just ride the residual fertility for that next crop.
Brendan, I think this is a good spot for us to pivot and go to the lightning round. I've got to get a word from one more sponsor, and then we'll be right back. This lightning round and perennial support for the Farmer to Farmer podcast is provided by BCS America. A BCS two-wheel tractor is the only power equipment a market gardener will need, with PTO-driven attachments like a rototiller, a flail mower, power harrow, rotary plow, snow thrower, log splitter, and more. You name it, you can probably run it with a versatile BCS two-wheel tractor. The first time I used a rototiller way back in 1991, it was mounted to a BCS two-wheel tractor, and it spoiled me for life. When you get behind a BCS, you can tell that it's built to the same commercial standards as four-wheel farm tractors, and it has many of the same features. I've used other tillers and mowers, and I spent most of the time that I was using them thinking about how much easier it would have been with a BCS. Check out bcsamerica.com to see the full lineup of tractors and attachments, plus videos of BCS in action. Videos are pretty cool. Brendan, what's your favorite tool on the farm?
We have an irrigation traveler, and hose reel. It's a Cadman 1500, and that thing is watching that thing irrigate our crops is just a wonder to me. I love it. It's so awesome.
So tell me about how those hose reels work.
So the way they work, it's basically a coil of pipe that's wound up on a drum, and it's attached to a cart, and I use an ATV or a small tractor to spool out the reel, and you spool it out. On the one end, it's got a sprinkler, like just a impulse sprinkler on wheels. And for us, that sprinkler runs along our roadways, our harvest roadways between each of our fields. And we've got 400-foot fields, and so I spool this thing out, 400 feet. And then at the other end, we plug in the water, and we've got a 4-inch water main to feed the reel, and it sprinkles, irrigates both directions in a circle, or you can move the stops and just do one side or the other, and it retrieves or coils itself back up under its own power. And you can adjust that quite finely, how quickly it retrieves. So between the retrieval rate and the nozzle that you use, you can put down a pretty precise amount of water.
Did you size your equipment to fit the 400-foot beds, or did you size the beds to fit a 400-foot hose reel?
I sized the equipment to what I had, because that came years after I'd established my growing space. But I think the one thing I had the foresight to do was to really think through our growing space. It's all very modular. It's all very, there's a lot of symmetry, there's no 200-foot beds. They're all 400. And, our roadways are the same. It was easy to add a really, slick irrigation system in that setup. And, we've gone through the evolution of using lots of drip tape on the farm, and then also swearing a lot while using said drip tape. And now we only use drip tape where it's absolutely necessary, and that's under, some sort of mulch or in our hoop houses. But, overhead sprinkler for everything else. And overhead's got its downsides, but boy, to be able to put that much water that quickly on crops when they need it is the real big upside. Because one thing I've learned is that there's a big difference between, watering your crops to see your plants survive and watering your crops to see them thrive.
So talk about that a little bit. How do you decide how much water you're going to put down on a given crop?
Yeah. So, we of course run those raised beds, which dry out more quickly, so we do have to irrigate. If it's hot out, we need to be irrigating each crop, maybe a couple times a week even. I like to go down to like my wrist. I dig down, and it should be sufficiently moist, not soggy, but, good and damp right up to about my wrist. And so that's your main part of your rooting zone. And if it's not good and moist, then that's when we bring out the irrigation reel, and we make sure that it gets good and moist. And it's also been really great to be able to give crops like potatoes, for instance, water when you need to give them water. When they're flowering, hammer the water to them. It makes all the difference. If you're trying to keep up on your successions of your carrots and beets and lettuce and everything else, it's one thing to put the seed in the ground on the date you had hoped. But if it sits there and doesn't do anything because no water comes for 5 or 15 days, that throws that whole plan off. So to be able to put the seed in the ground and then make sure it gets water right away, we're getting more consistent results with our germination, keeping us on track better with our cropping plan.
We haven't talked a whole lot about your wife and farming partner, Marcelle. We talked a little bit about her role on the farm, but what's Marcelle's farming superpower?
Marcelle's farming superpower. Well, she carries her clipboard around with her religiously, her Clippy, even to bed. She's still organizing the next day's work. And she's extremely organized. And that's, and me being a man and being who I am, I'm not that. And so I love that about her. But I think in terms of an actual superpower, she's got a real good sense of seeing things for what they are, whether that's, personal interactions, or she can look at a plant and see its stress when the rest of us would not even notice. She's just got a really innate ability to see things for what they are in a real unbiased, no bullshit kind of way. And because of that, she's an awesome farmer because she just has an intuition with plants and with animals that, the rest of us really wish we had. So I think that's a big one. I love her for it. I love her for lots of reasons, but that's a big one.
And what's your favorite crop to grow?
And me, celery, without question. I love celery. We grow a lot of carrots. Carrots are our number one crop. We grow over an acre of carrots, but celery is where it's at for me.
What about celery? Because that's a weird one, Brendan.
You're not calling me weird, are you?
I'm not calling you weird. I'm calling your choice of a favorite crop weird. There's a difference.
Okay, so think about it. Celery, it's a tough crop to grow. I mean, just to get that stuff to germinate consistently is like the first feat. And then, it's a needy crop. It needs lots of food. It needs lots of water. It's also quite vulnerable to a lot of pests. It's a really challenging crop. And when you nail it and you end up with those huge, big celery stalks that are crispy and crunchy and they're not stringy and they're sweet that you don't get in, industrially grown celery. I mean, it's life-changing for people who are really into food in the same way that, we've all had those customers come up to us and say, wow, your carrots are so awesome. I just can't eat store-bought carrots anymore. You spoiled me for life. I get the same kind of comments about celery. And there's that difference between good organically grown celery and the other stuff. It's stark. And every time I pull off a celery crop that's of that quality, I'm just so proud of I'm the only one at the market who notices. I should say that because no one else, and I'm standing there behind the table and I'm just beaming with pride and for what I'm able to accomplish, and no one cares. This is strictly for me. So, but celery also is a potentially very lucrative crop. We put a lot into it. We grow our celery with lots of compost and alfalfa pellets. We put it on that paper mulch I talked about, so it never dries out. We use quick hoops, and then we hoop it off with row cover, and we pin it down, and we walk away, and we make sure that we irrigate it. And we come back, in September when it's ready. So we put a lot of labor and expense up front. But when we go to harvest, all of our beds are 400 feet. We put 3 rows of celery on that bed. So that's 1,200 plants on a 400-foot bed. At worst, if it's a salvage mission, you're going to be cutting, 4 celery plants to bunch them together for a stalk and sell for $4. So that's a $1,200 bed. At best, though, each of those plants grows to be a $4 plant. And now we're talking about a $4,800 400-foot bed.
Nice.
Which I did the math on last night. It's $96,000 an acre. So
not bad.
That's pretty good.
Not bad. All right.
Who needs microgreens when you've got celery?
Yeah.
The problem, of course, is that there's only so much of it you can sell. So, that's the trick. And, I want to learn how to be able to hold celery over into the fall to feed into a winter CSA down the road. I know it's possible to hold it for several weeks, if not, approaching 2 months. But, I just don't exactly know how to make that happen at this point.
Finally, Brendan, if you could go back in time and tell your beginning farmer self one thing, what would it be?
I'd tell myself to think bigger. I didn't scale the farm appropriately from the beginning. I had too narrow. I was thinking 5 acres, 100 member CSA, $50,000 gross sales. There's my life, which is a joke. I mean, 50,000 gross sales is not going to cut it for us and for the overhead and what we're doing. I think that I would say don't limit yourself to some arbitrary number, but rather define that number by what your financial needs are, which, by the way, is a lot more than you might think, And to that end, I would also say borrow money if you're able. And, I know lots of people are phobic of taking on debt. For me, I look at it this way. There's very few of us in this world that are privileged enough to be able to take on a mortgage or a loan. That's a privilege. And why not exercise that privilege to leverage that privilege to help you acquire the equipment needed to make more money off the farm more quickly and put yourself into a better position for the future. So those would be my sage words of wisdom to my former self.
Awesome. Brendan, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thanks, Chris. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm awfully flattered that you invited me. So thanks very much.
All right. So wrapping things up here, I'll say again that this is episode 127 of the Farmer to Farmer podcast, and that you can find the notes for the show at farmertofarmerpodcast.com by looking on the episodes page or just searching for Grant. That's Grant. The transcript for this episode is brought to you by Earth Tools, offering the most complete selection of walk-behind farming equipment and high-quality garden tools in North America, and by Rock Dust Local, the first company in North America specializing in local sourcing and delivery of the best rock dust and biochar for organic farming. Additional funding for transcripts is provided by North Central SARE, providing grants and education to advance innovations in sustainable agriculture. You can get the show notes for every Farmer to Farmer podcast right in your inbox by signing up for my email newsletter at farmertofarmerpodcast.com. Also, please head on over to iTunes and leave us a review if you enjoy the show. That makes a big difference in our visibility and how many other people are able to find out about the Farmer to Farmer podcast. You can support the show directly by going to farmertofarmerpodcast.com/donate. I am working to make the best farming podcast in the world, and you can help. Finally, please let me know who you would like to hear from on the show through the suggestions form at farmertofarmerpodcast.com, and I'll do my best to get them on the show. Thank you for listening. Be really safe out there and keep the tractor running.